Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and welcome to another week, another podcast, another interview. Hope you had a great weekend, and I hope that your week is starting off well. If you had a 3-day weekend, hope you did something fun and or productive, or, however you like to spend your days off. Mine involved laundry and some meal prepping and those sorts of things. So it was productive, but also kind of lazy because I spent some time talking to my parents and my in-laws, and I think I got a nap. And yeah, so good stuff. Hopefully your day was however you envision it. As I said, we do have another interview today, and I mentioned it at the end of the last episode. I am speaking today with author Marie Lavender. Marie is a multi-genre romance author, but we are speaking today mainly about her paranormal romance trilogy, which is called Blood at First Sight. We are talking about the second in that trilogy, called Blood Instincts. It is, obviously I just said it, it's the second in that trilogy. The first one is related. It has similar characters, but it is the main character in this book's parents. It is their story. So you get, I would say you could read either of them as standalone novels. The third one, she envisions as a trilogy. The third one, I think you'll want to read the first two in order to have the third one make sense, because I think there's going to be a lot of things that get wrapped up and questions answered from those first two books. But I hadn't read the first one, and I had no problem reading this one as a standalone. So you could probably read them in either order, although if you want to read them, in the order that they come in and in generational order, you would probably want to read the first one before you read the second one, because that's how numbers work, right? Yeah, that's what I learned in elementary school, really. I'm going to give you the description of the book and stop rambling. So, what if you found out that you weren't exactly human? Maya Sullivan is suddenly living that nightmare. There are others in the world, dangerous, supernatural creatures that make her mind spin and cause her to question the reality she's always known. Oliver King is her savior, a vampire who tries to show her the way. Through her journey, she learns far more than she ever thought she would about herself and about the past. Soon, she discovers that there is so much more to meeting Oliver than mere happenstance. Can Maya accept her new reality, or will she retreat into that normal, safe world she once thought was her own? So there you go. We have urban fantasy. It's contemporary, except that it's set slightly in the future, not too far in the future. But the first one's set kind of, I would say, more now, and then since the second one does focus on the daughter of the characters in the first one, you do have to move ahead in time. So this one is set a little bit in the future, but not too far forward. So it is paranormal romance. The characters are, Oliver is a vampire. Maya has just found out that she's something other than human. She spent her whole life thinking that she was human, and now she is something different, and I won't give that away in case you want to read it. It's one of those books where, you have this seemingly normal, quote unquote, normal person, mundane, if you want to use that word, a lot of books do, finding out that she is more than she thought she was, and that maybe she has a role to play in something that she didn't even know existed. And so Maya has to figure out what that means, how she's going to adjust her worldview. And Oliver comes into this situation and really tries to help her. It starts out, he is trying to help her adjust and figure out her place in this new world that it's not new, it's just new to her. And so she's realizing that the others, that's capital O, the others exist around her. She's just never realized it, and now she can't unsee it. So she has to figure that out. One thing that I really liked about this book is that there is some of that trope of the fated mates here, and yet there's also a big focus on consent, not just as Marie speaks about in the interview, not just sexual consent, but consents of other kinds as well. And Oliver and Maya, it seems as though they might be fated mates, but there is that issue of consent. And I really appreciate, as I've said before, that books are going more in this direction as opposed to fated mate, you're mine, doesn't matter what you want, you're, poof, and they feel very uncomfortable to me. So I'm much happier when we have consent. So I did appreciate that about this book. I am going to now let Marie tell you more about it, as it is her book. So let's turn now to that interview with author Marie Lavender about her book, Blood Instincts. As I said, it is the second in the Blood at First Sight trilogy.
Hi, Marie. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
It is wonderful to have you here, and we are here to talk about your newest book, Blood Instincts. Before we get to the book, though, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, that would be great.
Okay. I am a multi-genre author. A few years ago, I realized my writing projects crossed many genres, and I didn't want to be boxed in. I always wanted to be a writer since the age of 9. I am from a small town, and I still live in the Midwest.
Okay. And yeah, before we came online, we were both talking about living in small towns and the fun and the challenges that can be involved in that. So the book is Blood Instinct, and it is the second in a series. So tell us a little bit about Blood Instinct.
Blood Instincts is a paranormal romance with a slight futuristic angle. It's a unique take on the vampire-human hybrid story. Maya gets a big wake-up call. I don't want to give too much away.
Right. So yeah, you said with a slight future, and it's set in the future, but not terribly far in the future.
Yeah,
Can you talk about
I didn't want to alienate readers too much with that. I mean, I don't consider it a sci-fi story at all. So, but since it takes place like 25 years after the first book, I still had to put the year in and everything. So,
right.
But I wanted there to be just like a slight increase in technology, but not so much that it's like, okay, what are we talking about?
Right,
so,
right. And what was your inspiration for this particular story?
I wanted to write a story about someone who learns something strange about herself, and the book details how she handles that.
Mm-hmm. And so the main characters, Maya and Oliver. Oliver is a vampire. I don't think that gives anything really away. Maya has a slightly different experience. What about them as characters and as a couple do you think will resonate with readers?
Maya's so practical as a person. The other world, which is what we're calling the supernatural realm, is scary and unbelievable to her, at least at first. Oliver, he, besides being a vampire, he's an artist. And I think there are a lot of facets to these characters that readers can relate to. I mean, they're, in a lot of ways, they're very human,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. And there is that theme, to a certain extent, in the book of fated mates. So can you talk about that theme of not only fated mates, but also consent in the novel?
Mhm. So I often like to include a destined lovers theme in some of my books. I believe that everyone is meant to find that one special person.
Mm-hmm.
And as for consent, I think it's a big deal in the series, not just in a sexual sense, but the vampires can be quite persuasive. And many of the others, the supernaturals, they won't act without consent on some level, some willingness from a human that they want to feed from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, not all of them. There's
right.
the whole like good versus evil. Just like humans, there are evil humans, in the world.
Exactly.
So there aren't good people, and that are others as well. So.
And we are going to talk a little bit more about this issue of consent, but we do have to take our first break of the podcast. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, Marie and I were speaking about the trope of fated mates and the idea or the issue of consent in this type of romance, and we're going to continue that conversation now.
I found it fascinating because, and again, I don't want to give too much away, but there's a part later in the book where the decision that they make in their relationship really has a profound effect on Oliver. And he could have made choices that would have been good for him, but not so great morally speaking.
Right.
So I was actually really impressed with the way you handled that. And again, I know I'm being vague, but I don't want to give too much away because it is later in the book.
Yeah.
And then this is urban fantasy. It takes place in the contemporary world. But did you do any kind of world building for this story in this series?
Again, I didn't want to alienate readers, but I think what I decided to do with this one was to gradually bring in the different creatures, so that, because like I started out with in the first book where we're mainly talking about vampires, but then they mention other types of creatures that are possible. So in this book, I'm gradually bringing in some more types of creatures that, so that the reader is like, oh, okay, so there's more going on than I thought, and then I'll do the same thing in the next book as well.
Mm-hmm. And you have written, you said you're a multi-genre writer. Mm-hmm. What drew you then to start writing kind of paranormal romance?
I've actually always been drawn to it, so I guess you could say I read a lot of it.
Okay.
So, having read a lot of it, and of course, seen films and everything in that genre, it just kind of seemed natural to start writing my own,
Mm-hmm.
So.
And this is the second book in the series. Can you tell us a little bit about the first book, Second Nature?
Yeah, Second Nature is a case of a vampire being enthralled by a human, but she's not just a regular human, so she has some strange abilities, and it becomes an awakening for her and an introduction into a big world that most people never learn about.
Mm-hmm. And the characters in that book are actually Maya's parents, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Correct. So you've got that
get sort of the peek into it with this book. I wanted people to be able to just jump in, if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah, and I haven't read the first one yet, but you can definitely get kind of a taste of the first book, but you can definitely read the second book as a standalone. Now, the second book, it ends with a lot of things needing to be resolved. So I'm assuming that there's definitely more books in the series. Do you know how many books you foresee in this series?
The plan is to make it a trilogy, so hopefully I can cover everything in the third book.
Okay. And are you working on that other book currently, or do you have plans on when that might be out?
I've worked on some scenes and chapters for it. I'm not fully focused on it yet, but I have a general, like, I've come up with the synopsis, so I have a general idea of what happens. So.
Okay. And mentioned that you're a multi-genre author. You've written 24 books, I think I read. Are there one or two others that you'd like to highlight in this interview?
Just to touch on them briefly, I also have a Victorian maritime romance trilogy. That's called the Heiresses in Love series. This year we came out with a box set of the series, so that's a little bit more accessible. And then I also have a lighthearted fantasy series that has some romantic elements. That's called the Magic series. And like you said, I have like 24 books, so there's a lot.
Yeah. And your website mentions that you write under various pen names.
Do you plan to continue writing under those various pen names, or are you going to try to, I don't know, consolidate or just focus on one pen name, or maybe a few of them? I'm not even sure how that works.
What I'm planning to do is re-release them all under Marie Lavender so that I can. It's so hard to keep track of everything. So that's what I finally decided was I want to focus on Marie Lavender books only. So
okay. Do you ever have like identity crises where you can't remember who you are?
No, it's just that I can't manage that many social media accounts at once.
Sure.
So in 2017, I actually released Directions of the Heart, which is a romantic drama collection, and that has 4 novellas. And so that was kind of my first project, and that whole thing was to re-release 4 of them as one collection. So.
Okay, great, thank you. And
I have other ones too.
Yeah,
I mean, if you want me to go into briefly, but
I'm sure it's going to be a process as you kind of bring everything under one umbrella.
Yeah, I'm currently, I would like to release a romantic mystery collection this year, and then after that it'd be a paranormal romantic thriller collection, a romantic suspense collection, romantic adventure saga, and then the final one would be a literary fiction and poetry collection. So
fun. And so what's next? Are you working on another book? I know you've got some idea of the third book in this series that we're talking about, but are you working on anything else?
Right now I'm wrapping up the first book of a romantic comedy series.
Okay. And do you is there anything you can share about that, or would you prefer not to?
It's complicated.
Okay.
I guess I would like to keep it a secret right now, but I mean, people can keep up with my newsletter and everything and find out more. So
sure. You said that you've been writing since you were about 9. So clearly, this is something that you've always wanted to do. How did that process work for you?
Well, I think I was writing in my head before I knew how to write. So I would act out my stories with dolls and everything, and then once I could write a legible sentence, I started writing everything. It just felt natural to move into that writing kind of, realm or whatever.
And then how did you move into published writing?
Well, I think I kind of always knew, probably since I was about 9 or 10, I would always tell my family that, I want to be a novelist, and, and I think, I kind of worked toward that. I'd always get these writer's reference books from the library and everything, And then I knew at one point I wanted to find a traditional publisher. And so, I tried working on that as well, but, I did the self-publishing or indie publishing. I tried that starting in 2010. And then in 2012, I received my first book contract, so from a publisher.
Okay, so you've kind of come at it from both angles, from independent and more traditional. From your perspective, then, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
Patience and perseverance. That's usually what I advise. It's a long, hard journey, and patience can be such a useful tool to get through it. And furthermore, a willingness to keep going despite the obstacles, to adapt and evolve as a writer. That doesn't hurt either.
Yeah, I'd say that patience and persistence pays off in all sorts of areas of life, not just in writing. So we do have to take our second break of the podcast. When we come back, we will have the conclusion to this interview. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion to my interview with author Marie Lavender.
You mentioned that you do read a lot of paranormal romance. What else do you like to read when you have time? Do you have favorite authors and genres?
I read contemporary romance. I read historical. Now and then I try something different completely. Like right now I'm trying to work through this dystopian horror book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. A bit of a challenge for me. And I think there's a bit of an erotic angle to it, so it's a little bit weird for me. But, and I don't mind reading erotica, but this is just a weird angle to it.
Right. Wow. Dystopian horror would be about this, maybe not exactly as far away as you can get from what you write, but it's different.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to get everything kind of under one umbrella. Where can people find you on social media and the internet? Give your website and then give us your social media handle.
Okay. MarieLavender.com is my author website. I am on Google, Facebook, and Twitter. My Twitter handle is Marie Lavender 1. Facebook's a little bit more complicated.
Okay.
So I kind of got stuck with Marie and Lavender. It's like once you decide on one thing for your official Facebook page, they never let you change it. So anyways, That one says Marie and Lavender for the official page, but they can also find my personal account. And then let's see what else. I'm also on Instagram, and that one is also Marie Lavender 1. I'm on BookBub, so readers can follow me there and get updates of new releases. I have 3 blogs. Writing in the Modern Age, I Love Romance blog, and the MLB blog. Two of those I host author interviews, except guest posts. We do a bunch of stuff like giveaways, and on my romance blog we just started doing book reviews, so that's kind of exciting.
Okay, fun. And I am looking on your website right now, and there are links to all of those. So if people can't remember, that there's the Anne on Facebook, they can go to your website and find those there. Thank you for that.
No problem.
As we've talked about things during this interview, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to highlight in terms of writing or your books? Anything we haven't covered?
I always hope that readers will connect well with my characters. That if they don't find some relation to anything in their lives, or in the story at least, they'll see a person in the character that feels real, someone to respect,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And if you have any other questions, let me know.
No, I think we've covered. There's the what is the name of this trilogy? Does this trilogy have a name specifically? There's Second Nature and Blood Instinct. What is the name of the trilogy?
Yeah. The series name is Blood at First Sight.
Blood at First Sight. Okay. I knew I'd read that somewhere, but I couldn't remember what it was. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend. We had quite the challenge getting this interview scheduled. So thank you for your patience.
Technical issues and all that.
Yes, I think we were both sick at one point.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining me for the podcast.
No problem. It was fun.
Once again, thank you so much to Marie for joining me for this interview. I mentioned that we had some difficulties getting it scheduled. First, I think first she was sick, and then we rescheduled it, and then there was technical issues, and then we moved the studio, and then there were more technical issues, and just, and then I've been sick. And so speaking of patience and persistence, as she was earlier in the interview, I really appreciate her patience and persistence in sticking with it and actually making this interview happen. So it took a while, but we got it scheduled, and I am glad we did. Thank you again to Marie for joining me. Thank you, as always, for joining me for these episodes. I love books, and I love talking about books, and I am glad to have you along with me for this book adventure that is the podcast. So, yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for reading, and I hope you'll join me again next time when I'm going to be talking about books, because it's a book podcast. And I haven't quite determined what kind of books I'll be talking about. You'll just have to tune in and find out for yourself. But in the meantime, you can certainly go out there and get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.